So I recently watched a video that was by, I believe the channel's called Maxonomics, and they had said that um, basically they're very bullish on America because looking at the uh, something data, I don't remember what it was, but looking at basically the transportation data, they were looking at flatbed trucks, and usually they were saying that shipping looks like it comes in from the coast and then it goes into the center of the United States. But they're seeing a turnaround where flatbed trucks are now sourcing from the center and going out to the rest of America, like towards the coast instead. And they said, okay, this is a big sign. This is really good for America. And I just wanted to kind of like I just was started thinking about this right now, and I feel like there was a bit of kind of uh, a misleading representation of the data there, because one thing that I think is important to highlight is that they were only talking about flatbed trucks, and in the video they were saying, oh, there's only a certain type of like they did a lot of talk, right? There's a lot of talk going on, so you kind of stop focusing on what it is. But the reality is that they mention all the types of trucks and all these things, right? But they say only flatbeds are coming out of the center of America, and only a certain type of cargo gets transferred on flatbeds, and that's stuff that can't fit in a box, basically. And then he lists off companies, and a lot of them are large equipment companies. And one of them that I'm familiar with, well, actually two of them are Kohler and Generac, which are companies that create generators. And you transport generators on flatbeds because they are these massive units and they're already in enclosures, so you don't need to put them in another box. They're already in a box. You just put them on the flatbed, and take them to where they got to go. And the thing is that that is great and all. Yeah, great. We're manufacturing stuff in America, but that does not include products like food and other consumer goods. That is strictly large equipment that is pretty much getting transferred on flatbeds, and a lot of that equipment can be attested to basically generator companies and things along these lines that are manufacturing their equipment in America, because there are regulations that requires a certain amount of built in America to be in order to be used on a project, right? If it's not manufactured or built in America, then certain projects won't allow you to use it. And so there's some incentive there for there to be at least the final construction in America or something along these lines, right? And so I know, like, I've been to the factories of Generac. I know that they're manufacturing these in America, and they have to ship them on flatbeds. And what is the most crucial thing right now? Energy. And so they are shipping out tons of these generators on flatbeds to locations that are installing generators because energy is crucial, right? And so, on one hand, they make the argument in that video that we have cheap energy, and cheap energy is actually going to be more beneficial than cheap labor going into the future. And I totally agree with this. However, two of the big companies that are, feeding this shipping increase from the center of the United States are companies that are there to provide not necessarily permanent energy solutions, but backup energy solutions, which implies that these companies are preparing for potential energy shortages. And that, to me, is concerning in itself. And I feel like there's just the video makes some good points. I think that in the future, America is in a good position with cheap energy. It can become as labor costs increase and robotics and automation and AI and all these things reduce the amount of labor needed, energy is what is going to be more important, and America's in a good position to capitalize on that. However, I do not think that looking at flatbed shipping is necessarily the best reason to be super bullish on America, and I don't think that that's going to be in the short term. Short term, that's going to be in the long, and I think that we should, um, really think about the information that's coming to us, and think on it a little bit more critically, because on in one hand this video sounds great, but I felt like the whole time I was watching it, I was watching some kind of infomercial for America or something. Like someone was just trying to sell me America, and it felt off. Like I've seen some of their videos in the past, maybe I just really listen to them so I don't really watch them, and this is their normal style, but it felt different, and I don't know if they were just trying to shake it up or if they were told really make this engaging, because the format just felt different. It felt off. It felt performative. It felt like they were trying to make this video as enticing as possible because um, it needed to be, because they really needed to sell America is doing good and is looking great and its outlook is fine. And I'm not totally convinced we have the the necessary equipment and um, preparations in place to really capitalize on that quite yet. So while there's potential in the future, our energy infrastructure is not there. While we do have a strong source of natural gas and oil, that supply is depleting. So that is a short-term benefit. We really need to look into transferring to cheaper alternatives, or more, um, or at least an alternative that is going to last longer. And so if we can resolve this short-term squeeze on energy, then I think that long-term we are in a good spot. However, right now our country as a whole is significantly lacking in energy. We do not have enough power to supply the power we are demanding from the system and want to demand from the system in the future. If every car goes electric, if all these data centers get built, if everyone is online and everything is using power constantly for everything, if automation goes robotic and AI driven, then something's got to power that. And I don't think our infrastructure is positioned currently to capitalize on that. And I don't think that it's positioned for long-term capitalization on that. And I think if we address that, then yes, super bullish on America. But in the short term, no, we're not ready for it. And I don't think we're thinking long-term enough. And I think that it's something we really need to be considering and keeping an eye out for when you see videos, because not saying that they were trying to intentionally mislead. However, I do think that there are certain points that were overlooked or kind of touched up a little bit to make it seem less impactful than it truly is. Certain things were just kind of uh, glazed over is the term, and I don't think that that is good. I feel that feels icky to me. It feels icky to me to say, "Oh, this is really great," and then anything that's potentially bad gets kind of ignored in the video, because when it's a very one-sided opinion, that's when I start to ask, okay, well, whose opinion is this? Is this your opinion? And typically, uh, when something looks, sounds, and smells like propaganda, that's my first reaction. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, look at the propaganda everywhere, but it really does feel like it's everywhere. And it's concerning, because saying everything's great makes people believe it is, but that doesn't mean it actually is. And at some point we will have to deal with that. Anyway, that's all. Peace out.
Yeah. So my main issue with this is the fact that yes, it felt while they provided a lot of information, it felt while I don't disagree with everything they said, it felt like certain things weren't really explained, and they highlighted what was beneficial and not necessarily the whole truth, right? And so my concern with this is that, as I said, we really don't have the energy infrastructure in place. I think that in the future, yes, it could be there, but if we're relying on fossil fuels, if we're relying on natural gas and oil to fund our cheap energy boom, basically back into the manufacturing world, my concern with this is that we cannot sustain that because it's a limited supply, right? We need to move to a new energy source. So if we can establish ourselves with a more efficient and that has a potential longer runway to be useful, right? Then I think that will put us in that position where it's like, okay, everything's electric. We've got plenty of power. We are now going to dominate in the manufacturing industry. Like on a global scale, America will be booming again when it comes to manufacturing, right? However, we're not ready to do that right now, right? And saying, saying being very bullish on America seems a little disingenuous because it's like, yes, in the long run, right, it's going to go up, but that's not right now, right? That's not right now. You could say that about anything. Yeah, the market's going to go. I'm bullish on the market, right? I'm bullish on the market in 10 years. It's probably going to be higher, right? But that's because you're putting it at a far out time frame. You can assume that if it's at this level now, with the current trajectory of how the market plays, it's always going higher. Here's the thing. Is it going higher because it's actually better, or is it inflation? That's a whole nother thing, right? But, I think that there's definitely some concerns here that need to be addressed, and they need to be highlighted because we are not ready for the future we built for ourselves. And I actually, after I recorded this video, more recently, or this audio recording, more recently I watched a video talking about car manufacturing, and it sounds like, from what they were saying, a lot of manufacturers are dialing back how many EVs they're producing because there's not enough demand, right, for these EVs. And so they're kind of dialing back how many EV vehicles they're creating, because the reality is that, personally, as much as I want to save the world and let's go green and all this stuff, I just don't see the practicality of an electrical vehicle right now because the infrastructure is not there, right? And so no one cares to solve that problem, it seems, but it is a significant problem if you want to change how America runs. Right now it runs on oil, it runs on gasoline. Then you have to also change the infrastructure. You can't just change the top layer, you got to change the base too, right? And so until that happens, I don't see us really making that transition, right? We're not necessarily ready for the transition we want to make. And again, the energy infrastructure is not there. Oh my goodness. Is not there for it. It's just not. And so, personally, I'm really not that crazy about EV vehicles. I think it's better to overturn pretty much our entire infrastructure for transportation in general. What that looks like and what that costs, right? That's for the future, I guess. But there's certain things that is just inefficient and not properly addressed, not properly thought out, that needs to be considered before we put ourselves in the position we want to be, right? And as automation and robotics and AI and all these things start to take a larger and larger role, energy is what drives those things, right? And so if we can front run the technology for automation, and we can front run the technology for more and like more energy and more efficient energy and cleaner energy and more sustainable energy, right? All these things. If we can front run those two aspects, then it will be like in the long run. If we automate everything, right, we have a lot coming out of America, but what does that mean for Americans? That's really the next question. That wasn't really addressed here. Is that if automation and cheap energy is what leads to, the next boom for America, and when it comes to production, right? What are all the people in America going to be doing if the reason why it's become cheaper to manufacture in America is because they're no longer using Americans, right? If there's no longer people in the factories, right, producing everything, what are all the people doing to make money, right? How is that functioning? And I'm not sure anyone's really thinking about that, but that's another thing to consider. Like, okay, we're going to produce all these products. All these products are going to then, we're then going to send these products out to the world, right? And then the profits that come from that, some of that then gets sent back to, the people as there's basically, citizen fund, right? Thanks for being an American. Here's your money, right? Like, I don't really know. I don't know. I feel like the whole economic structure, the whole way that money works is going to fall apart when you put automation at such a focus, right? Because you can produce a lot very cheaply, but that doesn't mean that anyone can afford to buy it, right? Because if they're not working, then they have no money, right? They have no money, they can't buy anything, and then what's the point of producing all this product no one can afford, right? And so you basically need to have some kind of way to get money injected back into the economy, back into the hands of the, common citizen. And so I think that potentially it's some kind of citizen fund, but I don't know if that's really the best method for it. But ideally, if we could do that, then maybe that would be the best thing, right? Everyone, you don't have to work, right? You can just kind of pursue your passions or something, right? And then you're going to get not necessarily a ton. You can still work, right? You can still work jobs and make more money, but there's going to be this basis level that everyone gets potentially, right? I don't know, right? But I think that it's something that needs to be considered, because at the very least, if no one has money, what's the point of making anything if they can't buy it, right? So, the whole point of, you work a job to get money, but if all the jobs are replaced by automation, that's a problem. That's a concern. That's something that needs to get addressed. And so there's just certain factors to this that highlight all the good sounding stuff, but there's a lot of issues behind the scenes. And I think it's important to be aware of these things and be thinking about this kind of stuff when you're watching anything, really, and listening to anything or reading anything, because there is a lot of incentive to promote certain agendas and not promote others, right? There's a big incentive to not be fully honest. And so it's your job, it's your responsibility to be aware of that and what it may mean for you, right? And what you're experiencing, what's going on for you, things along these lines. So, that's my thoughts on it. I don't think we're ready. But that doesn't mean we can't be. We just have to make some changes. So, yeah. Peace out.